Good afternoon. My name is Vasilios Marinis, and I'm professor of Christian art and architecture here at Yale. And it's my great pleasure to welcome you all to this lecture in our series. Both our speaker and our respondent really need no introduction, so I will be brief. Robert Nelson is professor emeritus in the history of art at Yale. He studied and taught medieval art, mainly in the Eastern Mediterranean, and the history and methods of art history. His publication list is very, very long, but two recent articles exemplify his interests. A miniature mosaic icon of St. Demetrius in Byzantium and the Renaissance, published at Dumbarton Oaks Papers in 2021, and Technologies of Art History, Slides, PowerPoint, and Virtual Reality, which was published in 2022. Last year, he was a member at the Institute for Advanced Study in Princeton, working on a study titled A Book in Time, The Lives of a Golden Lectionary from Byzantium to Renaissance Italy and Today. Professor Nelson is famous for his eloquence and for his dedications to teaching and mentoring. Our respondent, Annemarie Weyl Carr, is University Distinguished Professor of Art History Emerita at Southern Methodist University. Her scholarly work has been devoted to the history of Byzantine art. She has worked especially on the history of the icon, on questions of cultural interchange in the Eastern Mediterranean Levant in the era of the Crusades, above all on the island of Cyprus, and on women artists in the Middle Ages. Among her many outstanding contributions are Byzantine Illumination, 1150 to 1250, the study of a provincial tradition, a masterpiece of Byzantine art recovered, the 13th century murals of Lycée, Cyprus, and Asinu, the church and frescoes of the Panagia Phorviotissa in Cyprus. Additionally, Professor Carr is a consummate educator who has mentored a whole generation of Byzantinists in the United States and abroad. And it is my pleasure to welcome both Professor Nelson and Professor Carr, and I turn now the microphone, so to speak, to Professor Nelson for the talk.
Thank you. Thank you, Vasily, for this introduction, and thanks to Annemarie for agreeing to come back for this repeat performance, which hopefully will go better than the one that I gave in Greece. All right, let me begin by thanking again my students in Singapore that inspired this paper I was teaching there in the fall semester of 2016. And they told me of an icon in Singapore, and I was very interested in this. And I went to see the icon, and this whole paper is a response to the questions my students asked, why is there an icon in Singapore? One of the students in my class, Carmen Dania, then helped me as my research assistant in Singapore, and I'm very grateful to her help. After Mass at a Catholic Church of the Redemptorist Order in Singapore, a crowd surrounds an icon of our Mother of Perpetual Help. Concurrently, thousands come for weekly devotions to our Mother and her icon at the National Shrine in Baclaran, Philippines. Some walk the length of the long nave on their knees, as this woman is doing. The object of veneration in both churches is a hand-painted copy of a 15th century post-Byzantine icon. It now resides in the Redemptorist Church of Sant'Alfonso di Liguori in Rome. It has justly been called the most popular icon in the world. Swathed in a dark blue cloak, Mary looks directly at viewers. Her right hand is held up. Her long fingers she holds the infant child with one hand and points to him with his other, and the child grasped his mother's thumb. And to the left and the right are archangels, Michael and Gabriel, and they're bringing the instruments of passion. The child looks back at the angels, frightened and agitated by what he sees, and hence his grabbing his mother's thumb, and also the fact that he must have been jiggling his leg because he's about to lose a sandal. The icon has a long history from local cults in Crete and Rome to its present global veneration. While the object has remained the same, its changing interpretations and interpretive communities, from an Orthodox Middle Ages to a Catholic and Orthodox present, are the subjects of this paper, which is forthcoming in the journal RES, Race, a journal of art and anthropology. My paper is structured circularly so that it concludes where it begins in Southeast Asia. The subjects broached fall into a category, an active category of scholarship that might be termed Bild und Kult, Hans Belting's a title of his book, Kult Bilder, Gerhard Wolff's concept, or the miraculous image, Megan Holmes. Mine is a longue durée study that concerns not only the centuries before the era of art, to quote the English subtitle of Belting's book, but also periods since the 15th century when art was supposed to have supplanted cult. I will argue instead that such a distinction is tautological and only applies to objects understood as art. In effect, the argument is saying that art is art. That's a tautology. In Southeast Asia and elsewhere, cults have not disappeared, and objects of devotion have not lost their aura, to use a term of Walter Benjamin. Moreover, the copies of the Roman icon proved to be just as powerful and efficacious as the originating image, contrary to Walter Benjamin's influential thesis that modern reproduction kills the aura of the image. Thus, the modern copies resemble their medieval forebears in meaning and significance. Painted in Crete during the second half of the 15th century, the seminal icon arrived in Rome by 1499. Known as the Virgin of the Passion, Panagia tou Pathous, in Crete and the Greek-speaking world, its medieval iconography was the culmination of a long development in which images of mother and son were associated with the latter's eventual suffering and death. Multiple versions of this Cretan version survive, painted by, especially by Andrea Ritsos and his circle, including the icon you see on the right in the Princeton University Art Museum. The Virgin of Passion is a later adaptation of the well-known Byzantine Virgin Hodegatria, which you see in an ivory in the Walters Museum. The Hodegatria was the Palladium image of Constantinople, thought to have been originally painted by Luke, and this 10th century ivory gives you a good version, a good notion of what that icon was like. In the early versions of the Hodegatria, Mary looks away and does not engage beholders, a general convention of early icons of Mary and Christ, and one that's continued in the ivory. Later icons of the Hodegatria introduce psychological engagement between the mother and child. And you can see that in the left icon in Macedonia, northern Macedonia, where the child is looking to the mother. And she's, at this point, she's actually looking more or less out at us. A 14th century panel on Mount Sinai introduces the instruments of passion and the motif of the child looking back to them. On the lower edge of its frame, difficult to see, but it has been read, is a Greek epigram that explains the composition. The same text translated into Latin appears on icons that Ritsos made for Latin Christians, such as the Princeton icon on the left. The epigram in translation reads, "He who once greeted the Virgin now shows the symbols of passion. Christ, clothed in mortal flesh, trembles at seeing them, fearful of death." So the inscription explains the anxiety of the child. It emphasizes the passion of Christ and explains why the child grasped his mother's hand for reassurance. The Roman icon with which I began, therefore, follows the Byzantine iconography of the Virgin of Passion. Looking more closely, however, at the Roman icon in comparison to the one in Princeton, there are a number of differences. First, the colors of Mary's garments have been switched. The tunic has become red and the cloak dark blue, which is the color combination of Western medieval paintings of the Madonna. Second, the depiction of the Christ child in the two panels are not the same. The Roman Virgin is comparatively naturalistic, with broader lips, locks of curly hair on the forehead, and especially his sleepy eyes, all of which departs from the stylized Virgin at Princeton. Rizzo's also depicts, in the Princeton icon, depicts the child with an oversized cranium versus the normal portions of the Roman panel. Saints with such enlarged crania are common in late Byzantine painting and denote the intellectual and spirituality of the holy person. To account for these and other differences with the late Byzantine painting, it's necessary to review the history of the panel at the Church of San Alfonso di Liguori in Rome. According to a plaque from the early 16th century, the icon arrived in 1499 at another Roman church dedicated to Saint Matthew, San Matteo. The now lost plaque recounted the history of the icon. Initially, a merchant stole the miracle-working icon from a church on Crete. Concealing it in his luggage, he smuggled it aboard a ship bound for Italy. During a fierce storm, the merchant and other passengers made vows to the Virgin, who quelled the storm. After arriving in Italy, the merchant made his way to Rome, where he became gravely ill. As he lay dying, he confessed to a friend how he obtained the icon and made him promise to give it to a church because the Virgin had told him not to keep it for himself, but to find a better home for it. Ignoring these instructions, the friend's wife installed the icon in her bedroom, a widespread devotional practice in Italy then. And she continued to keep it there after her husband died. Next, her 6-year-old daughter began to have visions in which Mary told her to say to her mother and grandfather, quote, "Holy Mary of perpetual help requires that you remove her from your house. If not, you will all soon die," unquote. The Virgin further directed that the icon be taken to the Church of San Matteo, located between the churches of Santa Maria Maggiore and San Giovanni in Laterano. And here you see the now destroyed church, which was located between the great Basilica of Santa Maria Maggiore and the equally great or even grander Church of the Lateran here. And San Matteo is right here at the junction in a prominent street that links them. Icon processions, like the one that brought the panel to the Church of San Matteo, had a long history in Rome. On the eve of the celebration of the Assumption of Mary, the highly venerated image of Christ kept at the Lateran processed to Santa Maria Maggiore, where it greeted the early medieval icon of Mary. Other Roman icons received veneration. Santa Maria del Popolo, an Augustinian church in Rome, had a miraculous icon that Pope Sixtus IV declared in 1478 to have been painted by St. Luke. It was said to receive the maximum veneration of the Augustinians in Rome. In 1482, Clementi of Toscanella donated another painting of the Virgin and Child to the Church of Sant'Agostino near Piazza Navona in Rome. Said to have come from the Church of St. Sophia in Constantinople, it performed miracles during the plague of 1495, 4 years before the arrival of the Virgin of the Passion at San Matteo. Sant'Agostino, as its name suggests, was also a church of the Augustinian order, and since 1477, San Matteo had been its dependency. Thus, in the late 1490s, when the friars were told about a wonder-working Eastern icon, they must have rejoiced at the prospect of having a panel comparable to those in the churches of their fellow Augustinians. And like their brothers elsewhere, they too installed their icon at or above the main altar. In the account of the transfer of the icon from Crete to the Church of San Matteo, this account resembles medieval stories of the theft and translation of relics as studied by Patrick Gary, as well as transactions involving wonder-working images. Common to these accounts is the theft or purchase of a sacred object followed by a dangerous journey in which it demonstrates its power through miraculous interventions. Often the holy person depicted, or an angel, gives instructions to a dream to the possessor of the icon or relic. In its new location, the sacred object is incorporated into community that better respects its sanctity. The theft of a relic is not denounced because it was divinely inspired, so the narratives claim. If the relic had not wanted to be moved, it would have prevented it. For the icon in Rome, Mary addressed the small girl, quote, "Holy Mary of perpetual help requires that you remove her," unquote. She thus spoke for and as the icon and gave it a new name, Santa Maria de Surcusu Perpetuo in Latin, which is commonly translated in English as Our Mother of Perpetual Help. The title emphasizes the intercession of Mary rather than the passion of Christ as on Byzantine icons. Now, Mary's direct interaction with beholders takes precedence over the foretelling of the crucifixion. I want to go back to a better view. There we go. Now, Mary's direct interaction with beholders takes precedence over the foretelling of the crucifixion. As a result, the clasped hands of mother and child become central to the panel's new meanings. Positioned directly below Mary's penetrating eyes, the joined hands divert attention away from the direction of the child's gaze and emphasize instead the interaction of mother and son and the interaction or the engagement of mother with the beholders standing in front of it, praying to the icon. The technical examination of the Roman icon at the Vatican Museum in the 1994 revealed a number of important aspects of this painting in Rome. Carbon-14 dating determined that the tree from which the plank was cut, the wood plank on which the icon is painting, the tree ceased living at some time between the 14th century and 1457. This puts the date of the wood at least several decades before the icon's arrival at San Matteo in 1499, ample time for it to have been painted in Crete and to have acquired cult status there. The Vatican scientists noted that wood-boring beetles had made holes and carved tunnels in the wood of the panel. A prior restoration, they noted, had planed down the panel, reducing its thickness by 1/2 and destroying the original paint layer. The image, which we see, was then repainted on the back of the panel, and this is what we have today. Therefore, the naturalistic elements in the painting are due to the early modern Italian painter, and someone, the Vatican scientists concluded, this painter they concluded he was not trained as an icon painter. But why was such care taken to preserve the original wood? It would have been easier to make a new copy on a panel of proper thickness, as Orthodox artists might have done, because theoretically, the essence of the icon was not the object in hand, but its archetype. The conservators proposed that the old panel was reused due to the cult or relic value of the Roman icon, a reasonable suggestion, if not in keeping with the decisions of the Second Council of Nicaea of 787, the last ecumenical council of the entire Christian church. Both Eastern and Western churches accepted the decisions of this council. It declared that images of holy figures were due reverence, not because, quote, some divinity or power is believed to lie in them, but because the honor showed to them is referred to the original which they represent, unquote. Evidence about the modern veneration of the Roman panel and its context of painting is limited, unfortunately, because the archives in the entire church of San Matteo were destroyed in the aftermath of the French defeat of the Papal States in 1798. The friars at the destroyed church of San Matteo and their icon then moved to a nearby church until in 1819, they found accommodation in a more distant Augustinian church of Santa Maria in Posturella at the Tiber River, a church that today also does not exist. They built a big bridge there and tore down the church, so it's gone. The icon at this particular church was reported. It was reported that there was, quote, no devotion to it, no decorations, not even a lamp to acknowledge its presence. Rather typical of a later account that justifies the changing of the location. Meanwhile, in 1855, another Catholic order, the Redemptorists, purchased land for a new church and headquarters in Rome. That plot included the former site of San Matteo, around here, and there they built a new church, which you see on the left. Learning of the renowned icon that formerly had been at San Matteo, the Redemptorist fathers searched for it and found it in the Pastorella church. Next, they lobbied for its transferal to their new church, Sant Alfonso, the Neo-Gothic church, which you see. Pope Pius IX agreed that the icon should be properly near where it had originally been located and declared that it be given to the Redemptorists in exchange for a copy of the, quote, original, unquote, icon. According to tradition, the Pope advised the congregation, the Redemptorists, to, quote, make her known throughout the world, unquote. Shortly after receiving the icon in 1866, the Redemptorists began making copies by then a long tradition and to the Pastorella Church. These and many other official copies that followed were hand-painted and were not photographic reproductions. the order in Rome authenticated the copies by means of stamps on the back, and just as important, by touching the copy to the original in Rome. Hundreds of these authenticated copies were sent to churches across Europe, North and South America, and Asia before the end of the century. Simultaneously, the Redemptorists made paper reproductions and stamped the images on millions of religious medals. In the 19th century, in 19th century Boston, the devotees at its Basilica of Our Lady of Perpetual Help, which you see, bought pictures of her, wore medals with her image on them, and ate, quote, small tissue paper-like images of Our Lady of Perpetual Help that they called the pills of the Blessed Virgin. They ate the icon. An important further development of the veneration of the image began during the summer of 1922 at the Church of St. Alphonsus Liguori in St. Louis, Missouri, on the right. There, a large number of people came for a new weekly devotion known as the Perpetual Novena. Traditional novenas were periodically conducted over 9 days or weeks, hence their name, novena. But the Perpetual Novena was different, as it took place on a set day every week. An important aspect of these services was the reading of accounts of the solace and benefit of prayers to Our Mother. During the ensuing decade, this new devotion spread to other Redemptorist parishes in the United States, and then was taken worldwide, making the devotions global. After World War II, the attendance at novenas for Our Mother, Perpetual Help, declined in America, but began to flourish elsewhere, especially in Southeast Asia. In Singapore, the Redemptorist fathers from Asia initially rented a house on Thompson Road, for their new congregation. They had a small chapel in their house where they lived. During World War II, their house was bombed, but their icon of Our Mother of Perpetual Help emerged unharmed. A few years later, the superior of the Redemptorists in Singapore attended a perpetual novena in Bangalore, India, and brought back the devotion to his Singapore church. At first, the first novena was January 1949, when 81 people came. But soon the number overwhelmed the space of the house church. The next year, the fathers built a chapel for 300 people adjacent to their house, and then extended it to accommodate 600. This is the small white chapel that you see at the left of this photograph in Singapore. And devotions continued there for some time. Many more people would come than the church would accommodate, so people were worshiping in the parking lot nearby, etc. In 2017, a much larger and more expensive Gothic Revival church replaced the earlier chapel. The new church has clear similarities with the mother church of the order in Rome at the left. In Singapore and elsewhere, the power and mystery of the icon of Our Mother attracted the faithful who, as one of their priests wrote, quote, trusted the her presence in the icon to speak to them, unquote. Mary's direct gaze, as depicted long ago by Cretan painters, is described by another Redemptorist as, quote, the entry point of the icon, unquote. Through her eyes, we are in her presence, and, quote, she speaks to us about the love of her Son and invites us to open ourselves to receive it in faith and to live it with hope, and to live with hope in our lives, unquote. The icon and its devotion changed the Singapore church and the area around it, beginning with the name of the church itself. Although officially dedicated to St. Alphonsus, it came to be known as the Novena Church. The destination side on special buses that ran to city buses that ran to the Novena celebrations, devotions, there was simply a sign in front of the bus saying Novena. Everyone knew where the bus was going, nothing else was needed. The name then extended to the surrounding neighborhood, as you can see in this Google map I'm showing you with the word Novena circled. It was an important one because several major hospitals are based there. In 1982, the name of the Mass Rapid Transit station here, the underground or metro station, was changed from Thompson Road to Novena. As Mary herself had renamed the Cretan icon at the end of the 15th century in Rome, its replica in Singapore, and the devotion to her renamed a church, a neighborhood, and a metro station. In the Philippines, Redemptorist priests, again coming mainly from Australia, established new congregations. After World War II, the new weekly devotion to our mother, the perpetual novena, took root in a fertile environment. The Redemptorist Church in Baclaran, a suburb of Manila, began holding novenas for our Mother of Perpetual Help in 1948. The devotions grew exponentially. By 1949, the church had to be doubled to accommodate the 60,000 people who attended 8 daily prayer sessions. The third and present church, which you're seeing, began 3 years later in 1952 and was inaugurated in 1958. It is the largest church in Philippines and probably the largest church in Asia, seating 2,000 devotees with standing room for 9,000 more. Today, 100,000 people come every Wednesday for the 13-hour-long novenas, consisting of prayers, hymns, and testimonials of devotees to our mother, and interspersed with occasional masses. The services began at 5:30 a.m. and end after the 7:30 p.m. novena. Devotees then remain all night praying to our mother. At the end of the church's long nave, the icon presides above the main altar, framed by a blue circle and mounted on a tall metal scaffold. People stream in through the day to pray to the icon. Because the altar and the icon are so far away from pews in the nave, every other pier has a television screen that shows a general view of the icon and a detail of the panel. I should say parenthetically that I was there at about this time in December, and the church had been decorated with Christmas decorations. That's what you see here. The screens in the nave, you can see one of them, show the Tagalog translations of a popular Marian hymn. As worshipers sing the hymn and follow the words on the screens, they contemplate the actual or televised icon, thus embodying the messages of both. On the north side of the church are offices and rooms for writing petitions to our Mother of Perpetual Help, as you see here. Her icon presides on the wall above. Outside the door to this room, nuns sell inexpensive color reproductions of the icon. People bring them inside and touch them to the icon on the wall, thus making contact relics under the presumption that sanctity transfers through contact. This practice replicates the official process of authenticating copies of Roman icons for this and other Redemptorist churches throughout the world. The faithful experiences of our Mother of Perpetual Help at Baclaran are mediated through copies and replicas, that are venerated by touch, direct or indirect when possible. The mediation of copies, however, does not diminish the sacred presence of Mary for the faithful, who, even if they had read Walter Benjamin's essay, The Work of Art in the Age of Mechanical Reproduction, would have paid no attention to it. For international churches and communities who have welcomed and embraced our Mother of Perpetual Help, the status of her icon as original or copy is irrelevant to its power across great distances that are greater even than the itinerary of my title. Spaces of devotion, however, cannot be mapped in conventional terms. As the French historian Michel Ducerteau once wrote, "What the map cuts up, the story cuts across," unquote. Accounts of our mother, from that inscribed next to the icon in early 16th century Rome, to the personal testimonies about her efficacy written here at the Baclaran Church and then read during perpetual novenas, these stories helped her to unite believers across diverse cultures. The mission of the Redemptorist Fathers was to spread Christianity around the globe and to make its icon known everywhere. In the process, the image of our perpetual help, of Our Lady of Perpetual Help, has become the most popular icon in the world. Finally, I want to return to the originating icon, the Orthodox Virgin of Passion. In case I have left the impression that this icon ceased to have an active life in the Orthodox Church in my long discussion of its Catholic devotion, I show the new Orthodox Cathedral in Albania, a country that is still rediscovering religion after the end of the communist regime in the 1990s. At the left is the Virgin of Passion icon in the cathedral's narthex, just inside its impressive bronze doors. There, Mary receives daily devotion from clergy and laity, just as thousands pray to her in Singapore, Manila, the United States, and Catholic churches throughout the world. This is global Christianity today. Thank you. And now I invite Annemarie to join us for a discussion.
Yeah.
Good.
Well, thank you so much, Rob, for the thoughtful and feeling discussion of this famous icon. It is a remarkable image, and it's a privilege to spend a certain amount of time with it, and it has drawn interest. And just recently we've received Matthew Milliner's book, The Mother of the Lamb, about our Mother of Perpetual Help. And now you've sort of guided us along this path through the centuries to its explosive modern devotion. And I think in the process, what I'm particularly responsive to, and thank you for, is your focus upon the centrality of the image itself in its global dissemination. Given the sort of looming presence behind the cult's implantation of a proselytizing institution as formidable as the Redemptorist order, I think it would be easy to kind of step back from the image and emphasize instead the persuasive power of the redemptorist forms and rhetoric. But in these miracle working images are a particular kind of phenomenon, and I think they have a kind of doubled claim upon us. I mean, as Byzantinists, of course, they have a claim upon us because the Byzantines actually were pretty good at making them. But I think that they are also a form of a particularly forceful example of the sheer ability of images to absorb attention and galvanize it, so that I think they do deserve serious interrogation as images. But there's so many other things that cluster around a cult, that I mean, of literary interpretation, of institutional manipulation, of ritual modification, aesthetic judgments, all are so close at hand that it's easy, as one turns to work on these images, to let these other things sort of elbow in and draw one's attention away from the image itself. And I think that it's been very powerful moving with you through this global trajectory to watch the focus upon the image itself. And really, in your lecture, you sort of threw this vast lasso around the most popular icon in the world, over tremendous distance, starting and then returning to places which for many of us feel very distant, but then showing us that in fact Byzantium had preceded us already in getting there. And having sort of started out at this what seems like very distant past, then you move back ultimately to Crete in the 15th century, across from Crete, across the Mediterranean, to Papal Rome, across the Atlantic, to the Americas, then to down under, and to ultimately to the Pacific Rim sites, where you once again conclude always with the sort of invariability of the image, smoothing out any differences of peoples and cultures as one moves. And this consistency that you sort of stress is powerful. And as you say, the copies of the Roman icon proved to be just as powerful and efficacious as the originating image. Thus, the modern copies resemble their medieval forebears in meaning and significance. And in the course of the lecture, you sort of held us spellbound, just sort of watching the processes of the development of this story. On the one hand, following the object, and on the other hand, the image which the object is carrying, which have their own particular histories. And I think a sort of fascinating story here is that actually the object has survived. The image is still on its original panel. Its original panel has great power over it. So that although it is at this point several steps away from its original condition, it's still occupying its original panel and is valued essentially as an original. I mean, such paintings, as you say, are generally regarded as relics. But of course, if it had been a relic, it would have had a radically different process of dissemination, which depends upon the reproducibility and evocativeness of the image that is on it. And so you showed us also how the image is the product of a long gestation over time, how it sort of evolves through various stages to culminate ultimately in the hands of Andreas Ritsos. But then once the panel has sort of brought the image to Rome, then, as you showed, there are a series of sort of Roman recolorings, recoloring literally in how it looks, in the colors, of recoloring of its theme, and even recoloring of its name, which move it to a whole different name. And the image itself moves at times to celebrative display, at other times to unilluminated quiescence, just as a kind of panel sitting there, as it was sitting when the Redemptorists managed to rediscover and to reignite its charisma. And they introduce it into active life in a particular way that sharply curtails its variability, at the same time that it demands very extensive reproduction. And some of, as you point out, some of their reproductions actually are authenticated and sent out into the world under the icon's own name, essentially as originals, to be cult to the cult icons of new devotional communities. They also introduced this new novena, and which was initially accepted in the United States and then spread from there. And that's what you introduce us to then in Philippines and Singapore, just watching this happen. We learn very little about what the verbal content might be of one of these events, whether their stories were told, whether there were admonitions, warnings, biblical readings, whatever might have happened there. But you gave just a fascinating picture of the persistent presence of the image there. And the numbers of devotees is just amazing. And so is also this sort of recurrent presence of the image in one, as a authenticated painted object, or as a virtual TV image, something that one can actually put papers up against, which you certainly would never do to the face of Mary herself, if Mary were there. So there's a kind of tick-tock between image and object, sort of working together within this community to merge the present image with its original. And yet the original in Rome is itself no more than a copy. And copies just cascade from it in quantity. And their sheer proliferation is intensely visual. It really sort of creates this powerful sense of visuality. For me, it was just a wonderful message about the visuality that you kind of missed when I was talking about the Kikotissa. And as you write, that this sort of, devotion, sort of visual power has enabled our mother to unite and not divide living, changing belief. And maybe I'm sort of presuming that my sense is that past devotees are embraced in this living belief that the image draws all together. And I thought this was really I'm watching this, working with the image. I thought was really wonderful. And obviously, I'm very compelled by it. It's very exciting to me to see another miraculous image being seriously engaged. I thought it was really very, very exciting. But of course, it does raise for me questions which I'm sure you have answered. And if I could just see how. I mean, and you say that the copies of the Roman icon proved to be just as powerful and efficacious as the originating image. And I think this you've shown is very powerful. And then you say, thus the modern copies resemble their medieval forebears in meaning and significance. And yet, in a way, you've just shown us how it is constantly shifting in meaning and significance. That even its name, its colors, and so we're sort of shifting. So, do the modern copies resemble their medieval forebears?
Well, those are great questions, and I really appreciate your comments. And I also thank you for mentioning Matthew Milliner's book, which I've yet to receive and haven't read. I wrote this paper basically during the pandemic. This was my pandemic project. Maybe in times of old, people would have studied Saint Roche or something, who was the patron saint of plagues or something. But anyway, I studied this icon during the pandemic, and so I haven't read Matthew's book, and I'm sorry. I was so struck when I was in Manila by this tactile piety of the people there. There was a large crucifix in the narthex, which everybody was, I mean, you have to imagine this, it's like going to a football game or a soccer match, whatever word you want to use for that sport. There were just thousands of people there. And in the narthex, they were all clamoring, sort of pushing each other aside, trying to touch the crucifix. Touching that bit of sculpture was very important to everybody. There's another major procession of a different religious image in Philippines that takes place elsewhere, in which the statue is pulled along on a cart, and if the faithful can't get up to touch the cart, it's sufficient for them to touch the rope that's pulling it from a tractor or something. And it was that same tactile piety that was existing in this place where people wrote petitions The petitions to Mary are read out, a number of them during the service, during the novena, which, by the way, you can follow online. You can follow it in the Philippines online, or I'm sure many other places, and you will see the. So there's a. You might call it clever, but there's a very significant interaction between the believers and the image that takes place over the religious devotion, in which they sing hymns to Mary, and the novena is not mass. The priest is not celebrating the Eucharist at the church in McLaren, interspersed between, I don't know how many novenas during the day. They have 3 or 4 masses given in different languages, English and Spanish and Tagalog, if I'm saying that right. So it's, but the novenas are not they're not the mass, and the celebration in Manila is held every Wednesday. Again, not on Sunday. So this is a kind of extracurricular religious practice. How medieval this is? Well, I emphasize perhaps the medieval aspects. Of course, you can see in many ways in which Manila was not a medieval site, at least of Christianity. Singapore as well. I didn't mention in my talk, because I couldn't fit everything in, or my article, about the very extensive celebrations of Our Lady of Perpetual Help in Latin America, especially Brazil, where there's apparently the fathers in Carr told me there's an even greater celebration of Our Lady of Perpetual Help there at a church. But the whole thing strikes me as I'm watching the World Cup these days, which is bringing the whole world together. I mean, at the same time, it's pitting one part of the world against another. It's also bringing it all together at the same time. But Our Lady of Perpetual Help is doing this without competition amongst the regions. Everybody is engaged in devotions to her in all of these different places. So I think as profound as the World Cup is, and as lucrative as it is for everybody associated with it, it doesn't really compare with the Christian Church. One could make a similar kind of claim for globalism with other religions, Islam, Buddhism, etc. But in this paper, I tried to first of all answer my students' questions in the Singapore class. Why was there an icon in Singapore? And concomitant with this, why was the icon in a Catholic church and not in an Orthodox? I mean, one expects to see an icon in an Orthodox church. An icon receiving such devotion in a Catholic church was rather special, I thought. Anyway, yeah. I appreciate your comments very much.
Yeah. Well, I think that I'm wondering, just a question that comes up. I think one of the things which icon people are sort of stop and ask themselves is how do you refer to the devotees? Are they do you speak in terms of faith? Do you speak in terms of devotion? Do you speak in terms of belief? And what are the variations that you bring as you choose different words? I mean, Frank Graziano says that in simplest understanding, faith is required to make one deserving of a miracle. Miracles, in this view, are negotiated through reciprocity. This idea is clearest when informants use devotion rather than faith to explain the commodity exchanged for the miracle. One visits, prays, makes offerings, and makes sacrifices, and the miraculous image reciprocates. Have you sort of encountered sort of questions as to how one actually refers to, speaks about, is it faith, is it belief, is it devotion that one is witnessing here?
This is a great question, really, and it's profound and one that surely troubles everybody that studies religion in general. You know, the journal in which this paper will appear is the Journal of Art and Anthropology. Anthropologists have spent a lot of time thinking about the relationship between the observer and the observed, and how far you become a member of the tribe in order to study the tribe. I'm being very simple here. I had a colleague once at Chicago who's now, I think, gone to Stanford, but anyway, she was studying modern paganism or witchcraft or something like that. And in order to do this, in order to really understand this form of belief, she had to become one of them. So she became a witch, literally. I mean, there's a process by which one becomes a witch. I know nothing about this, but so the problem always for the anthropologist or the student of religion is how to both keep a veil or some sort of border between you and the practice, so that you supposedly can be objective and all-seeing, versus dropping that veil and becoming one of them. So I'll just say to our audience here, I am a practicing Christian. I had recent surgery, and I took a copy of Our Lady of Perpetual Help to the hospital with me. So I'm embracing to a certain extent the religious cult myself, but I tried in what I was writing to maintain some kind of scholarly distance.
Mm-hmm.
So using the word devotee instead of believer, never using the word faith, for example, those would be characteristics of a scientific discussion, a so-called scientific academic discussion of religion. But this is a very, very interesting issue, and I've tried to discuss it with various people in divinity schools and things, and it's a very interesting topic. I think art historians should have a discussion of it as well.
That's great. Yeah. You know, another area which I'm just fascinated with was that how it seemed to me so radically how differently the icon behaved, or object image, until it sort of became redemptorist, and then once one gets into the domain of the redemptorist, it really stops changing, they seem to have a very precise sense of what an icon is, that militates even against changing size, and they authenticate copies. I mean, that's something which I've encountered in the 16th century in, for instance, Spain, with fascinating chapters about authentication, about the book about the Guadalupe Virgin. The Virgin of Guadalupe has authenticated copies. but it's not something I really know from the Orthodox world until about the 17th century, when the monks of Iviron produced the Iveriotissa for Moscow, and produced this image that is sort of authentic. So, what are what do the Redemptorists must have a rather particular notion of what an icon is?
Yes, I should say, and I should have thanked at the beginning. There are several archivists of the Redemptorist order that helped me a great deal with this paper. The image that you're looking at right here came from Rome. This is the so-called official digital image that the archivists of the order in Rome sent me.
Really?
Yeah, this is it. I mean, it's been downsized for use in a PowerPoint, but this is the image. And you know, one thing, I think you're raising a really interesting point. So all of these copies, authentic copies in the Redemptorist churches, they're the same size of the panel in Rome, which is the same size of the Byzantine icon on Crete. And it should be obvious from my slide here that you can hardly see the thing right back here because it's so small. Now, Byzantine artists, we're talking about medieval artists, would make copies of a prominent religious image. They would make it to the size that was visible, that needed in a particular place, if it's a mural or whatever. The Redemptorist process is to make copies of the identical same size, which I think is different than the medieval practice in a way. So size, so keeping to the same size is a way of establishing that link to the icon, the wonder-working icon in Rome. What I was really struck in the whole thing, in all of this research, is how contrary this practice really is to the ecumenical council that issued their proclamation about icon. There's no doubt the fathers there gathered would not approve of this practice. I mean, it's not to say that this is there's something peculiar to Catholics about this. Orthodox are doing the same thing, scraping off, etc. I mean, the actual wood it becomes important. But anyway, these are interesting questions. I appreciate that.
Yeah. Well, are there any images that you saw in Singapore or in the Philippines that could be that look visibly by indigenous painters?
Well, the Redemptorist icons that I were studying all look the same.
I mean, yeah, it really, in this sense, they all have to come from the outside, don't they?
They all come from the outside. They're painted by somebody in Rome. So they're sent out from the Mother Church to the world. For indigenous copies, you would look to the practices of Christians in Latin America during the Spanish colonial period and things like that. And that's a very interesting subject. I read as much as I could about religious practices in the Philippines, but I'm far from an authority on that. But I had help from a sociologist who studied the religious order in the Philippines for his dissertation, and Carmen, my research assistant, was able to put me in touch with him, and he was very useful corresponding with him. So I've learned a lot through other people, but I'm far from an expert on Christianity in the Philippines.
Right. Yeah. Right. I think that I was so struck that as you sort of were looking around the world, that the uniformity of the image was a way of sort of just, smoothing over differences, the sort of differences that you talk about with the World Cup. The sort of smoothing out differences of nations and sort of particular aspects of belief. So, in a way, it does seem as though the Redemptorists are sort of that they provide the image, and that so local variation doesn't really appear.
It doesn't appear, and it's striking that way. I was in Tirana. I was in Albania leading this tour for Yale alumni, and one of the people on the tour was from the Philippines and had gone to religious school in the Philippines, a school of Our Lady of Perpetual Help. And she walked into the Tirana Cathedral, and Orthodox Cathedral, I point out, and couldn't believe that her icon, her image from Puerto Rico was here in Tirana. So was really struck by it.
Yes.
Yeah, so
that's wonderful. Yes.
Yeah, and it's a wonderful subject, I think, to study, and I presume there are other kinds of subjects, like, for example, the Byzantine icon that you're writing your book about has a very active life in the Orthodox world.
Yeah. Yeah, yes, and of course it's got indigenous artists all over the place. I mean, Romanians, Albanians, Bulgarians, Serbs, Russians, Syrians. I mean, just Ethiopians, each with their distinctive inflections.
And that's different. That's different from this practice. Very interesting. So in a way, as much as I wanted to write against Walter Benjamin, this whole phenomenon of Our Lady of Perpetual Help is dependent upon the notion of mechanical reproduction of images, like printing and everything else, so that one can have fidelity to the original, so to speak. That's important. So there is an underlayer of printing and mechanical reproduction to this phenomena that separates it, for example, from then your icon, what I'm calling your icon, and the many different versions by local artists, right?
Yeah, right. Are you here to tell us to pipe down, Vasilis?
I'm happy to listen to you more should you wish to continue.
Yeah.
Well, Annemarie and I can keep talking about this for hours. I really wish we could, but I don't know if the rest of the world is interested.
No, Rob, this was such a privilege. Just thank you so much.
Thank you very much, Annemarie. So over to you, Sam.
I would like to thank you both for this absolutely magnificent paper and a very interesting discussion. I learned a lot, and I'm truly fascinated by this phenomena. I would like to invite you to our next lecture, which will take place at the same time a week for today on December 9th. The speaker will be Brigitte Pitarakis, and she will be speaking, she will be giving a paper titled Discovering the Byzantine Object in Late Ottoman Istanbul, Diplomacy, Archaeology, and Collecting. And until then, be safe and be well. Bye-bye.